Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to our, fortunately, last presentation of the day, at least for this year's symposium. Got a very interesting and tremendous speaker for our last topic. Many of you have asked questions about data architecture. This is one to tune into with deep attention. Leslie Owens is Forrester's Principal Analyst and Research Director, serving enterprise architecture and big data professionals. She leads a team of analysts who provide research and advisory services on emerging technologies, information strategy, architecture, data management, and content management, many of the complex areas that we face on a regular basis. She helps enterprises improve access to information through strategic application of technology and guidance on process. She's got more than 12 years of experience in the field of information management. Prior to joining Forrester and being their principal analyst, she managed the enterprise search program at Abbott Laboratories. And in this role, she developed enterprise search strategy and guided the selection of ontology management software, very complex arena. In addition, she contributed to enterprise initiatives around records management, collaboration, digital asset management, web content management as well, systems globally for a multinational organization. And in addition, prior to Abbott, she had developed taxonomies as an independent consultant for leading Fortune 500 clients. So please help me in welcoming Leslie Owens to our Merits Innovation Symposium.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have fun.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here. I've learned a lot today. It's been so fun to spend the day with you. My talk is titled Demystifying Big Data, and I hope I'm able to accomplish that, and we can have plenty of time for questions at the end. I wanted to begin with a story around JCPenney. I don't know if other people have been following this story, but I've been tracking it just because it's such a terrific kind of fable of hubris and humanity and what happened when they brought in a very glorified Apple exec to transform JCPenney, to kind of do his magic on JCPenney like he did at Apple. And when Ron Johnson came into JCPenney, he started out by eliminating all language of sales, all language of clearances and sales racks and things like that, because they were contrary to what he had learned at Apple, which is that we don't do sales. We set pricing at a certain level. And what he learned is that people end up loving sales. The customers at JCPenney were the type of people who really got a kick out of getting a bargain, who loved to go through all the clothes and find something with a bunch of stickers on it that showed them what a good deal they were getting. And after he learned and listened to the customers, he started to say, you know what, we learned that sometimes she actually prefers a sale, and at times she loves a coupon. So what JCPenney was struggling with was kind of how to reinvent itself following another company's business model. What they found is their unique culture really couldn't translate with this new CEO. In fact, when we look at what happened, it was really quite disastrous. Their stock tumbled, their retail sales were unprecedentedly low in terms of how drastically they declined, and the CEO was replaced with the old CEO. This kind of brings me to what a lot of people have been talking about today, is your best likelihood to make good decisions your gut, your hunch, your opinion, those kinds of things? Like he came in and had his own way of thinking about the customer, his own way of perceiving what that customer might want. Or is it to rely on data? Or is it to do kind of this half and half blend? And I think with any given business problem or business challenge that we're facing, we're trying to strike the right ratio between the gut and the subject matter expertise of the hippos that we heard about earlier today, and the really data-driven predictive models and automated advanced analytics tools that are available today that are surprising us with what we're learning. A wrinkle to the JCPenney story that I find kind of interesting is that he also eliminated meetings. And so part of what his philosophy was that these kind of conversations were wasting people's time. And so in the case of JCPenney, what they were doing a lot of times was just managers would hop on the phone and they'd say, here's working at my store, we're merchandising this way. And every week they just trade stories from the region and from other kinds of things like that. And that's the kind of hunch that I think we've hit on a lot today. You know, that storytelling amongst your firm and amongst the people that you work with that really can't be replaced by a computer or a data model. Another example of a very data-driven but yet missed the mark story is Song Airlines. Does anyone remember this one? It's kind of like TED with United. This was Delta's attempt at a low-budget airline a while back. And what they did was a great deal of research finding out what the typical customer they were seeking might value. And in this case, they thought that she would value, a lot of times it was a she, fresh flowers in the restroom on the airplane, and apple martinis, and that the stewardesses, flight attendants would be wearing, stylish outfits, etc. Although this was very much tested in terms of listening, and we talked a lot this day about listening to the customer, thinking about the voice of the customer, what does the customer need. This totally missed the mark because the business model in airlines is still about operations. And so the fresh flowers in the restroom had nothing to do with the ability to operate a low-cost airline. We've seen this proven again and again with different airlines and how essential it is that their focus is on the bottom line. Or is it? Could an airline be customer obsessed? I think that it's a real challenge when we think about where is the pain point in the customer journey when it comes to an airline. Is my biggest pain point with airlines how the flight attendants are dressed? Certainly not. When we look at companies like Virgin Atlantic that are customer obsessed and running a very thin margin business, they're doing this journey mapping and tracking the customer and trying to identify where these friction points are. They're saying along this journey, which I think one of the executives called earlier the travel rhythm, which I haven't heard before but I like a lot. Along this journey, where are the points of pain and where could we address them? In the case of Virgin Atlantic, what they realized is the pain comes that sometimes you're in places where you don't have access to check in online. Maybe this is before everybody had their smartphone and was able to do it, or their app wasn't always available. So what they realized, they need more check-in options. That's an example of being customer-driven in a tight industry and still being digitally oriented. We focus a lot on customer journey maps at Forrester. We think that they're a really essential tool, and mapping this up with your enterprise architecture work is a really cool way to be aligning between IT and business work. So we're seeing customer experience professionals working with business architects and doing that kind of listening we heard about from Tom, doing that kind of listening of understanding what the customer's experience is like with our brand, and then tracking that journey and saying, where do we need more information? And where is that information stored? What kinds of business outcomes could we improve if we change this or that? Target's a great example of the journey mapping story because what they realized is in retail, another very competitive industry, there's only a handful of times that someone might switch between a Walmart and a Target. And those are called the life events. Things like getting married, having a baby. Those are times when you might decide, I love this registry. It's so easy for my friends to shop here. And so because of this life event, I'm going to shift my loyalty altogether. So they focused on predictive analytics and data mining around the event of having a baby. You may have read this story. It made big news because they were so good at it that they were saying that they've been able to data mine their way into the womb, finding these obscure purchases that women make early on in their pregnancy, things like cotton balls and unscented body lotion, and being able to track that and see later on they buy a onesie and they buy diapers. So how can they reach those customers earlier? And in this case, they actually went so far that they reached people before, in one case, this teenage girl's daughter, the teenage girl, her father didn't even know she was pregnant. He was outraged. Turned out they were right. Everything turned out okay in the end, but it made a big PR story around people's use of data. It introduces these privacy issues, ethical issues, and questions about where we're going to go next. All the companies that we're talking to, and we ask business leaders, this is a business-oriented survey, what's most important to you from IT? They're saying, we'd like to improve the use of data and analytics to make better business decisions. So you've got IT people who are focused maybe on storage. They're thinking about bring your own devices, things like that. And you've got the business leaders who are asking, what about the information? Say you give me a tablet. Now what? Where's the information on my device that I can use? What the BI people are saying, these business intelligence users and planners, is the reason why they're investing in business intelligence. And year over year, it's the number one thing in our software planning survey that people are investing most of their IT budget in, is around making better informed business decisions. They're also hoping to improve customer interaction satisfaction, and less so to do these harder goals like competitive advantage and improved business planning. It's hard to do. So when we look at how successful people are saying that they've been with their BI programs, they're saying, yes, we've been very successful primarily around these more tactical, data-oriented things like making better business decisions and improving our business planning. But if we look at the bottom, actually using your business intelligence tools and solutions And programs, to gain competitive advantage, comes in lower on the list. And then number 2 here, improving customer interaction and satisfaction. Why? I think there are 4 reasons. The first we covered a lot in Andy's speech earlier today, the changing nature of data. We've got all kinds of new formats, the classic Vs. I think I've heard as many as 20 different kinds of Vs, volume, velocity, variety, etc. 2 things that we haven't covered as much today, within a typical enterprise like Forrester works with, there's a challenge of IT and business alignment. There's also a challenge of information governance, that kind of data hygiene stuff that someone asked about earlier with data management. Where does that fit in? Questions of data quality, data security, master data, and finally these big data analytics issues. So finally, most firms can shed their data limitations with big data. There are new tools and techniques that can help you get rid of some of the basic problems that people have with their data programs. But these other things are still inhibitors. We start by asking companies about how important these different data types are to their overall business strategy. A lot of times they focus on the transactional data, the structured data. That's what we see at the top of the list here. 53% saying that this planning and budgeting and forecasting data is at the top of the list. I think this is a really IT-oriented way of thinking about data. A lot of times IT professionals ask, is it structured or unstructured? I don't hear that as much from business leaders. Right? Does it fit in a database or not? Those are questions that I don't think a business leader is conceiving of. They're looking at a problem like the way that Caterpillar was. When Corey was talking earlier about bringing together the dealer location data with the sensor data from a heavy manufacturing item, that's a business-oriented way of thinking about data. I really encourage the IT leaders in the room to not think so much about where the data is stored, what solution is in, what vendor it's from, but instead be thinking about data in a new way. This really matters because these silos are actually falling down. The vendors themselves are starting to sell pre-built appliances for different problems. They're selling to the business. So they're going into an insurance firm and they're saying, you want to do claims processing? We've got a pre-packaged appliance that's optimized for claims processing. So it's ready to go with the best templates and jump starts and other things for that industry, for that vertical. When we think about product data versus customer data, are they still different? You know, a lot of what we've covered today is thinking about if the product is used in this way by this customer, and vice versa, if the customer buys this product when they have this behavior, you know, how are those 2 types of data being commingled and thought of together? So I encourage IT leaders to think about data outside of its format and type, outside of its solution or silo. What we see is that I agree with what we've heard from the different speakers in terms of focusing on places where you can add value, the hippos can add value on the subject matter expertise. When most people are exploring big data, they start with what they know. They start with their internal, transactional data that they know. And the reason why is because they can add that color. They can enrich it with what they also need to ask. So it's both the question and the answer. Moving over to the side there are these other types of data. I don't want to suggest that no one's doing it. Really, high-performing companies, one of the leading characteristics of high-performing companies is how much they're pushing aggressively out of the sandbox and starting to use social data, external data, and partner data. I want to introduce this idea of the data economy. What we have here is kind of a grid, and if we start at the upper right, we start by talking about where the data comes from, the data originators. So this could be the voter records. This could be your MasterCard transactions, your Fitbit run data. And it is all over the place, but often in the cloud or in the systems of record from these companies that we trust, the financial services firms, your hospital, places like that. You've got the different consuming companies. These are the clients, the people who need to consume that data to enact these different business processes. And then moving over on the left-hand side, we've got these new intermediaries. Some are new, actually, and some are legacy. And what they offer is the ability to analyze and aggregate the data with all kinds of new real-time information. So we have, for example, the Adobe Marketing Cloud that's bringing in this testing and targeting capability for marketing leaders who want to be able to try different marketing campaigns and optimize them. And at the top left, we've got these data aggregators. This is a really interesting space to watch. I know it's relevant for the folks in the room. because I think a lot of companies are starting to ask themselves, why do I keep this data in-house myself? They're keeping data that's available elsewhere. There's so much risk when we imagine the personally identifiable information and other things that people keep in their data warehouse, the transactional data that people keep, the social data that people keep. And this is just exposing you to more and more risk. Sony had a recent data breach that cost as much as $170 million. When we think about big data, the opportunity here is that you can tap this information on demand. Imagine what this means for your whole thought around data archiving, retention management, e-discovery, these kinds of things. What if you let go of keeping the data in-house and instead brought in the data on demand? And vice versa. When I was working recently with a patent analysis company, one of the things that they were most proud of was how diligently they scrubbed their company data. They said, we have as many as half a dozen data scientists who work on matching up all of the different company names. After they merge with different companies, they change their name. There's 20 variations of IBM. I said, well, what do you do with that? And they're like, not much. We use it to feed our front end. Their front end actually had a lot of work to do. It was a lightweight dashboard that people were paying not that much money for in a SaaS-based service. What their value is, if they thought about it, their deeper value is in their diligence around that customer data. That's what people will buy. I remember hearing Chris Anderson speak at a conference once, and you've probably heard this before, this idea that if you're not paying for it, you're not the customer. And he was talking in his case about magazines and how really they don't actually care how many subscribers they have. That's why they're giving them out to the dentist's office and things. What they're focused on is the advertisers. And I think that that's really true as we think about this data economy, questioning where your business model is in terms of what you have that's highly valuable. It's that reason why people are struggling with this different information governance and IT business alignment that they're starting to question if they should be outsourcing in this way. We ask business intelligence users and planners, how are you doing with your program? What is the biggest challenge you face when you're orchestrating these business intelligence strategies? The thing that they're bringing back is this question of information governance. Data quality, legal and regulatory compliance, data standards. These are the fundamentals. This isn't the fun stuff. This is the stuff that requires a lot of coordination and stewardship, a lot of meetings, a great deal of cross-functional collaboration. There are other challenges that speak to this problem of business and IT. So often we've got IT leaders who are investing in these different solutions, business leaders who have new requirements. And what we're seeing, I almost describe it as this transcontinental railroad, where business leaders are getting more and more IT savvy, coming to you with questions around Hadoop and things. Meanwhile, IT leaders need to adopt this language of the business so that they can meet together. I worked with a supermarket chain that was saying that they were sending their enterprise architects to usability training. They wanted to get into the language of user-centered design and start being able to contribute to this new loyalty program, but talking about it from the customer's point of view. The final thing that people are challenged with is this big data analytics. They've got problems with too much information, not fast enough. We're dealing with an old data warehouse. Those kind of things, as I said, are almost one of the easier challenges that you can solve today. These programs, these different solutions are getting much more mature, and you've had a lot of experience from these early adopters who have paved the way. When we ask people about their big data business plans, this is a real surprise to me. We ask them, does your firm have a business plan in place for big data? Among the people who are saying that they're doing big data today, 28% are saying, no, we don't have an explicit business case. And over here, those that do, only 28% have the measurable goals in place with the ROI. So that's another thing as we're thinking about the strategic planning that will follow today's event, is thinking about the link between your investments in big data, what are you solving in particular, and how does that speak to these business problems? I want to turn now to thinking about the ecosystem. This is what Corey mentioned earlier when she was talking about the promiscuous partnership possibilities. Some of the key emerging technology trends that we see are that more and more your customers are more engaged. By that we mean that they have new ways to communicate, they're always addressable, they've got their smartphones, etc. It's not just your customers, it's also these other parts of the B2B business. You've got your partners, your suppliers, brokers, and even the products themselves that are sending off new parts of your data. Part of what that means is that everything is getting smarter. And within that smart context, we want to be both nimble and secure. And that nimble and security, I think, is a real tension. The ability to have this new pivot points, to be able to make decisions quickly, but at the same time be mindful of this zero trust model as you expand the walls of who you work with. When we're talking about the zero trust model, we're describing a world where rather than verify and then trust, we never trust, because a lot of times some of the threats with data having value can even come from inside your walls. It's a new idea to think that data has value even outside of the context. A lot of what we've heard today is how much context adds value to data, that without it, data is meaningless. But really, we see that there's this whole market for all the information that we store, and I think this is a threat that's fueling that data economy that I mentioned earlier. Why keep the data and the potential risk around it when we could just use it at the moment of need? When we turn to big data, you may have your own myths and realities. Here are a couple that I hear a lot. The first is that it's a single technology. There are a couple that you hear about, Hive and Hadoop and Cassandra, et cetera. But when we go over to the answers, we really know it's just data working with these new solutions, a lot of times in commodity hardware and open source tools. The second myth is that it's around huge volumes of social and mobile data. But as I said, there's 72% of the survey respondents that we talked to say that they're focused on the transactional structured data in their internal systems. Another is that it's a project. It's kind of a standalone initiative that they're experimenting with, or you're using it to replace other things, or that it's not secure. But we're finding that most companies are using their big data efforts in sync with their BI programs. They're keeping them closely coordinated. It's not a standalone project. We describe it as that it's both techniques and technology that make handling data, by handling we mean everything, managing, cleansing, securing, accessing, data at extreme scale more economical. Three characteristics that matter. The first is that it's massively parallel. That's why when people talk about MapReduce and it started at Google, it's because of the challenge of trying to index the web. The second is that it's a flexible schema, so it can accommodate new data formats. We no longer have that limitation that things have to fall into rows and columns. And the last is that it's linearly scalable. So you can accommodate new formats and new data types and move through new volumes without having to re-architect your systems. This may be a little hard to read, but one of the things that we've thought through in our research is the different ways that people are funding big data initiatives. And when we group it into two parts, there's both selling to the business and selling to IT. On the selling to the business part, you may be choosing to emphasize the big picture, the transformation, the business model possibilities. And that's when a lot of companies are talking about this enterprise information service. They're asking questions about how they could release their data, how they could share their data, rent, borrow, buy it. Other people are saying, let's scratch the itch. Let's explore big data by augmenting our existing investments without too much of having to fit it into the long-range planning. On the selling to IT side, this is one of the easier sells because of the cost imperative around a lot of these technologies. You still find that 10% of the IT budget is going towards storage. So to be able to reduce that storage with lower cost solutions is very appealing to the IT leaders. What I want to emphasize is that these big data strategies should be living within a data strategy, within a broader business strategy. And we see that twofold here. You've got the questions around big data, which lie with these V's around business drivers like velocity, variety, and volume. And then on the right-hand side, you have uncovering new value. So it's that tension and the possibilities unlocked by having both new realizations coming from your data as well as solving those classic IT problems that's making people excited about big data. When we talk about the traditional BI programs, a lot of times, as I said, people are not satisfied with the realization of outcomes from their investment. The ROI is not what they hoped it would be. And what's different with big data is that your transformation analysis is happening maybe with less accuracy, but at a faster time. We sometimes say instead of 2 plus 2 equals 4, you might be comfortable with 2 plus 2 equals 3 point something, and that's good enough because having the information faster is more important. The next step that I think matters is that having that information faster, you do something with it. So that's a lot of what we heard earlier today around the Obama campaign is what do you do with the prediction? How do you act on the prediction? And here I just added this extra chevron, which says that you've done the transformation analysis, and now you're going to feed your campaign management tool, and now hopefully you'll be making these smarter business decisions. That's the link that I think isn't there with a lot of companies between their IT-oriented big data strategy and the bigger picture business problems that they need to solve. I mentioned earlier around governance, and this is another way of thinking around this data economy question. We've added in these 4 characteristics of data, and when we think about trust, it's a very subjective notion, but I think one of the inhibitors that people have around big data is that they aren't sure if they can kind of pollute what they've already worked so hard to clean by adding more information. So we know that one of the challenges with big data or with general business intelligence programs is this question of data quality. So we have to come up with new techniques and governance models to handle even more data. So we see in the top right there that when we're thinking about the internal data, the goal is to have that be controlled. And we can imagine the change management that goes around expanding your universe to think about information that's also maybe a little bit less trusted, that's internal, and keep it casual, but maybe has high value. An example of this might be your activity stream within your social networks. If you have social networks within the company, I find that that's an exciting area to think about tapping. I heard a leader at Accenture talking about how he's doing a big voice of the employee initiative, similar to the voice of the customer initiative. In fact, using the same tool, Clarabridge, that he uses for voice of the customer listening, he's using against his internal social collaboration tools. You've got a big company like Accenture, all these different professional services people, they're out on the road, they're working with different clients, they need to be trading information. And so mining that information for insight is a similar behavior, but something that a lot of companies haven't tried yet. That's the kind of casual, not yet trusted, because it's just a quick blurb, a quick activity update, but could be very high value. Down at the bottom, we've got the external information. And this could be both the chaotic stuff that isn't trusted or the things that you come up with mechanisms to validate. When we thought about the data structure, the data strategy and architecture and how they're evolving, we've kind of described it as these 3 characteristics, these 3 entities. There's the collectors, there's the investors, and there's the innovators. The collectors are the people who are working today looking back. They're looking at their business performance, they're looking at the information that they have at hand. They're focused on their data warehouse. They're focused on improving access through reporting and dashboards. They're mostly looking at structured data and the stuff they have internally. As people move over to the next stage, this investor stage, they're starting to use these BI tools and advanced analytics tools to start to say, where are the opportunities? Where are the risks? Where are the trends? Where are the hotspots? They may be investigating sort of a hybrid data platform, bringing in some big data tooling like a data warehouse appliance to fit into the overall data architecture. They may be starting to experiment with some limited predictive analytics and starting to experiment with unstructured information and a little bit of partner data. What's cool is that we're finding that some companies can leapfrog from collector to innovator because there was so much hard work in this middle stage, so much hard work with data integration, with working with tools that the hype didn't live up to the reality. And so when we talk to firms that are just starting out, they're able to explore the possibilities of a new start where they're able to think about these hyper-flexible platforms, working with partners, different data vendors and others who can help them leapfrog into this innovator category. Another way to look at it is kind of thinking about it as a data hub or a data lake. And I thought about this when we were hearing about the Obama campaign today, thinking about the possibility of having that master data. He called it master data when he was saying that the voter records just had a handful of attributes, and that becomes the master data. That's what goes in the data pool. And I think when we think about data architecture in this way, instead of the classic layer cake where you've got what you store all the way up through to what you interact with, instead there kind of is no system of record here. It's not really a system of record and a system of engagement, the sources of truth and then the places you interact. Instead, you're thinking about information moving in and out of this pool. It's not one pool, it's many pools. You could have the same kind of visualization, you're kind of articulating where it falls within different business functions, different geographies, et cetera. And around the edge, we've got your BI program, the different BI services. You've got places for experimentation and innovation. You may have new kinds of data moving in and out. In general, what we're hearing is that firms are asking a new attitude because they don't have these data limitations anymore. Today we've got the current state that the oil rigs are saying they're generating all this data and they're only using about 5%. Then we talked to a shipping company who says no data is discarded anymore. They're leveraging all kinds of transaction data and diversity of interaction data, and they're saving money. They're saving money by adding these new types of information. We think about all the different places where big data could fit in at Meritz and at other large enterprises. And there are a lot of different roles who may become the sponsors. You've got especially a lot of leading opportunities here with the CMO or the CMO's direct reports. These are things around marketing campaign optimization, loyalty programs, social media analytics, social listening, influencer analysis, etc. One of the cool things around on the security side with the CISO is that they may not be thinking about big data as a risk, but rather that these same tools and techniques can help them with breaches and leaks and detecting these different patterns of risk in their organization. You've got the CFO asking about financial risk analysis, governance, risk, and compliance, looking for governance monitoring. You've got the monitoring email, et cetera. Moving over to operations, this is one of our leading use cases, is thinking about supply chain optimization and other logistics questions. And then you've got kind of the classic IT-oriented problems. As I said, this is where you have the scratch the itch and other IT-led business drivers. But we think all of these things span different verticals. You've got possibilities in energy, especially with smart grid, and you've even seen the smart grid story go all the way through to the customer. So in the case of our utility back in Boston, we get flyers that say, you know, where my energy consumption matches up with my neighbors. That kind of stuff is possible through these big data tools that are collecting this information and turning it back around to try and encourage and incent behavior. And then at the bottom, we have these different horizontal scenarios for big data. Everything, like I mentioned earlier, but without the different business leaders attached to it. Let me tell you a couple of stories now about different companies and how they're working with this data. MasterCard is an example in the B2B scenario of how they're using their transaction data, opening it up to the merchants themselves. They're not sharing the specific purchasing details with these outside companies, but they're allowing them to then do this kind of audience targeting through MasterCard on their own platform. This matters because what we're thinking about with this data economy is that there are going to eventually be a handful of core providers. And we don't yet know who will land there. Sometimes you hear people talk about, I'm a Google person or I'm an Apple person. And I think naturally people are starting to lean towards a handful of these infrastructure leaders, these tech giants, who are probably going to own a lot of our information, and then we work with partners throughout the ecosystem to support it. But today, we're not there yet. Today, I think there's a lot of line of business-oriented and vertical-specific core providers. So you may say, I'm a Bank of America person, I'm a Walmart person, or I'm a Mayo Clinic person. And what all these firms who have, the potential to battle this out are saying is, how do I add more value? How do I get into this conversation? And that's what MasterCard is doing by sharing this data with merchants and then encouraging them to come to the MasterCard platform to do the analytics there. All this data, a lot of times, is happening as a service. So you have your infrastructure as a service, your platform as a service. Now you've got your audience targeting as a service, merchandise analytics as a service. A different example from a B2B story is Lowe's. So Lowe's, as you know, is a building supply company. And what they've decided to do is to share their point of sale data and SKU and store data through this thing called Lowe's Link. What they're letting is the manufacturers can run analytics and ask questions that they can't ask themselves. So today, a BI program at a typical manufacturer, they might know how much they're selling of a given product, but they don't know all of the related products that a customer buys at a given store. And through it, they were able, in this case, to say, a shelving manufacturer was able to say, here's a problem. We don't package the brackets with the shelf, and that's why the deals aren't coming through. That's why the sales have fallen off. Able to rethink the whole supply chain of how they package their product, because now they have visibility they didn't have before. So you wonder, what's in it for Lowe's? We think this is a win-win for Lowe's, where they're deepening that bond with these manufacturers. When you think about the data economy and the possibilities of big data, another thing emerges, which is this idea of a digital self. And I think Corey mentioned it earlier. When we imagine our personal information intersecting with our work information, intersecting with all kinds of other people who we trust. And that personal self is changing things like how we deal with our finances. We imagine these APIs as kind of the digital glue what Mint.com is offering is very disruptive. You know, and in other words, if your Bank of America and Fidelity and Merrill Lynch platforms aren't offering it, you're willing to work with something that isn't necessarily trusted, Mint.com, to share your most vulnerable information because of the value that people are getting from it. So what Mint.com is offering are these different budgeting tools, the chance to set these different goals, and then they're able to monetize it. So again, it's like, who's the customer? They're able to show these user-relevant offers to them and share this information back to the advertisers. When we think about what all of this means for you, I've got 3 recommendations. The first is to remember this thought of folding the data strategy into an information strategy aligned with business outcomes. So I think what's really exciting about this Innovation Day is the cross-function group that we have here, and to be able to solve these problems, thinking about what business leaders can bring and what IT leaders can bring, and how together, shedding some of these former limitations now with big data, you can address these business outcomes. The second is to consider the data that you have and the data that you need in the context of a broader ecosystem. And finally, to think about this information governance and other processes to get to this point of hyperflexibility. So here's my email. I welcome your questions now as well as anytime. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
So I work with a partner Merits that does consumer loyalty programs, and I can't count the number of times I worked with a client who said, well, we do a great job of collecting data, we just haven't done anything with it.
Yeah.
So we have 3-5 years worth of data on customer transactions. Could you look at this and tell us what you think?
Mm-hmm.
So when I think about big data, which I think marketers see as a huge opportunity, I could also see it being something that paralyzes a customer.
Yes.
Right? So used to collecting data, doing nothing with it, and now we're trying to talk about big data, which is even more and more sources.
Mm-hmm.
From your experience with talking to companies looking at this, is there a good place to just say this is where you start? Because you're not going to start with this full-blown big data strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a good place to start so they get a sense of what the value of it is, looking at it that way?
Mm-hmm. I think that what people are seeking is that ability to translate the information. So I'll give you an example. I was talking to a car rental company, and there were 2 people there. One was the customer insights person, the marketing kind of oriented person. The other was the data guy. And they had such a cool partnership where she would ask questions and he'd say, we've got that. But he would explain what he had in a user-friendly way. They really were side-by-side collaborators exploring the data together. So I think what is, the far-reaching goal is self-service business intelligence, that business users are empowered to explore data themselves. Well, that comes right against this big data opportunity, that's the last thing, people are so overwhelmed with the possibilities of today's BI dashboards. Imagine when later they can mine all kinds of, partner data, social data, et cetera. So I think there's a new role, this kind of business analyst role, who is this go-between, translating the requirements and then identifying these smaller pilot opportunities that are these safe sandboxes, to explore the information. Rather than, I think some IT leaders that I talk to are, you want all the customer data? Here you go. How do you like that? Kind of, there's still sort of this like hostility. That happened at a bank I was at, where he said, I gave him just what they asked for. I'll show him kind of thing. And I'm like, where are you going with this? So I think that there is still that need for hand-holding and explanation, just like there's the need, and we saw earlier about that kind of hippo to algorithm conversation. So that's the best answer I have in terms of thinking through the partnerships of having federated IT people who are out in the business, listening to the requirements which are new, seeing that as opportunities and matching that back with this emerging technology.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
I already have the mic, so that's great.
All right.
So early on in your talk, you talked about, you showed a chart that said most businesses do not have a business case in place for big data. But then you said big data is not a standalone project. And so I feel like those 2 points somewhat contradict each other, and I was wondering if you could elaborate.
Yep. So I think that it's the word business there that I probably wasn't as clear as I should have been, which is what is the intent in terms of what we're going to measure in terms of proving business outcomes for this big data project. So you may be able to say, hey, look, now we can store more information. We couldn't do that before. Or it used to take overnight batch processing, and now we can do it less because we're using complex event processing, these different in-memory tools or other things. Well, that's fine, but go further. And so the next step is to say, because now we can get the data faster, we're able to change our response time when this event happens in the market and the business benefits because they're measuring that too. So I think it's about the alignment of having shared goals where you come together and say, thanks for this investment. Now I can prove that I'm accomplishing this business goal. We're not yet at the point, I don't think, that business leaders are articulating, I need in-memory. They're not saying that's what they need. They're describing pain points around, as I said, time, other challenges with what they don't have, what they need. Does that help?
Over here. So you had the internal data, which
Yep.
we have in droves,
Right.
and do a good job of looking at. Then you have the external data that you want, that you can get to that could help you solve various questions. Do you know if somebody is doing a good job of aggregating or providing tools that try to bridge, or companies on their own to try to find those solutions? A good example for us is we provide buyers and sellers an audience together. But we have no idea of what they actually transact. We don't know if they actually buy or sell anything, but we know they do. So there's data available in certain places, such as lease data that's out there in the marketplace. There's banking data. There's loan data that we can go and get. But it's unstructured or different than we're actually able to get to easily. The bridge companies, who are these companies that help you bridge between internal and external data sources that are very dissimilar?
So these intermediaries are obscure, kind of, and hard to find. We profiled some in this report that's coming out called Pioneer Vendors. And in it we said, it's kind of interesting that we organized it again by IT types. So we said, if what you're seeking is geodata, work with this company called Space Camp, or I think that was what it's called. They're the ones who will be able to come up with open standards and APIs and ways for you to include geodata so that now your Salesforce CRM system can do mapping when your salespeople go out on a call. That's a pain point that people have. They want geolocated CRM systems, but they don't know how to do it. And so I think these companies are still relatively obscure, and they're oriented by the type of data. So you've got like Esri for weather data, and you've got Space Camp for the geo data. There's still only a handful of companies that work with the bigger fire hose of social data, like GNIP is one and other firms. I think there are 5 that have been authorized. So what I find is that these firms like a LinkedIn or a Facebook, it's not as easy as just getting that data. So as we said in the earlier conversation about tapping into the Google search information, that may be open, but for how long will it be open? You don't want to build a strategy around that.
I guess the add-on to that is that since we do have a certain really good set of data, are these companies then turning around and buying that? Are they an opportunity for us to sell that information into them?
Totally. Absolutely. Yes, for sure. I mean, this marketplace that's happening, is these new partnerships that are emerging between, as I said, the patent analysis company and a vendor that may be seeking a quick start drop down of company names in their cloud app. So who's got what is a conversation. There isn't sort of a clearinghouse place for that, I don't think, although there are some emerging that I can follow up with you around.
I'll send you an email.
Okay. Other questions? Yes, please.
So my question is, what's the legality of fair use of the data when it's, for instance, if we have access to the data, but it's not really our data because it's our client's data, are there any precedents around that to be able to identify where you can get access to it or do something with it? What is fair use for this data?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's outside of my expertise, but we do have an analyst that I can put you in touch with. Her name is Cheryl McKinnon, and she actually was just talking about drone data, kind of interesting, where they don't right now have a retention, the U.S. government doesn't have a retention policy for drone data. It seems like the kind of thing we need to have a policy around and something that we'll want to protect and ask questions around. And so it's challenging people whose job is to think about records management, legal, ethics, because if you only touch the data in real time or only for an instant as you're doing some of these analytics models, is that fair? Is it compliant? And are you at risk then later in any discovery situation? Any other questions? Okay, we'll wrap up. Thank you. Thanks, Ryan.
Oh, my pleasure. Terrific. Thank you. Thank you so much, Leslie, in going into a little bit more depth in regards to the architecture and technology. And there's a few things that really pop out to me that I've been seeing as well, and questions that we have to ask ourselves from what Leslie shared with us. And here's just a few of the ones that come out to me. We can look at this from our internal perspective. How are we as a company thinking of big data and the architecture? There's a couple elements that Leslie was bringing forth that are really, really profound in our analysis, and that is, how are we going to fit into these investments in data architecture that our customers are making? How they are collecting new data, building new architectures, these data appliances that have been recently released, get you out of the gate very quickly to be a big data company. If you're not familiar with that, take a look at Oracle's turnkey data appliance, where you're up and running and not have to invest the millions and millions of dollars that are typically involved in setting up a big data architecture. So the concept there is, how are we going to fit in as our customers start making these investments and build these architectures around their data? Then the second part is the data economy. How do we fit in? And Sean asked just a really tremendously important question there, which was, where do we fit in? We might have always seen ourselves as collectors, maybe analyzers, but are we sellers? We have vast stores of data within our company, vast stores that provide great insight and great value. So are we a seller? Are we an analyzer? Are we all three of those? So thinking of ourselves in that context as well in this data economy. How we fit into new architectures, big data architectures of our customers, and where do we fit in regards to the new data economy? And sometimes who we should partner with to achieve that as well. So, great. Well, I have the pleasure of closing our first conference and sharing just a little recap and summary of our day. I hope you greatly enjoyed it. We look forward to your feedback and comments from this session for going forward in regards to our innovation efforts, both in a symposium format and otherwise. I started off our night last night, it may seem a long time ago, but it started off the evening, and I really talked about it being designed and tailored for you in mind, in regards to having a private session where we brought speakers in as opposed to all of us going out across the country and having to listen and going and capturing those set speakers that might relate to us. But we brought them all in. And there's a reason for that. Obviously, we see you as change agents, see you as future leaders in the organization to bring us to help in this problem set that innovation helps solve. I said that innovation is a means to an end. Innovation is about growth. It's a means to identify and achieve growth in our businesses. And this is a core focus strategy for our business, growth. And to do that, one of the fundamental, as you look across all cases, I introduced the fact that many models, many shapes. You can go to Google, you can go to pharmaceutical companies, diverse steel companies, all different types of innovations taking place. They take different shapes, different forms, and different environments to create them. But what's consistent is innovation occurs at the intersection of disciplines. That's why we brought these diverse set of speakers from not our typical list of who we would listen to or bring in, and why we brought you, a very diverse group of individuals with different backgrounds, different businesses, and different expertises to come together. And so these are the core elements of it. But then we also asked, and hope you've gained a lot of insights and knowledge that you can bring into the strategic planning process. If you hadn't had a chance to read Big Bang Disruption, which was that HBR article that we provided in advance, the whole idea there was to bring together views of different people, I want to say truth tellers, I like to call them people who are foreseeing opportunities and what might occur, to take those findings, bring them into your businesses, bring them into the strategic planning process, the ideas, and have those factors in, and raise the quality of that planning process. That's a key outcome. So what's next? Well, that's the first thing, is the strategic planning process. There's a couple other next steps. First is, this is your ticket to the next step. First, to ensure you return your badges with all your connections, we'll be having a raffle and draw with some of the beautiful items you saw in the atrium as prizes, and we'll get back to you. But there's a second thing. We'll be posting all the materials of this conference, all the videos on our intranet. We'll also be setting up communities of discussion from this symposium among yourselves to share and to collect those ideas and thoughts so we can build upon it. And then as well, as you dial that information collectively into your strategic planning and start sharing it into some of the processes we've talked about, the Innovation Council, which is led by the business leaders, will continue to triage these ideas and bring them through stages where they can get greater light of day, as well as your own processes in your business units that you bring forward. So that's the next step. It's very dependent on you in regards to connecting, staying connected, sharing those ideas, and taking the ideas you have and putting them into business strategies. So with that, I want to thank you very much for making the decision to attend, to make this our first inaugural symposium for innovation. I look forward to comments and survey results to understand what we do next to satisfy your needs in the business units and beyond, to foster innovation, which is not just a creativity, but something that fosters successful commercialization of an idea and a concept. So thank you to you. Thank you to the team that put this together, especially from Merritt's Travel, as well as Tracy Gildehouse from the Innovation and Growth team, Michael Byers and Jay Harrison, and as well the support from your business leaders. If it wasn't for your business leaders and Merritt's leadership, we would not have had this forum of communication, this session to exchange these ideas and build and develop our capabilities in this area. So thank you to all of them. Thank you. Look forward to our next session.